rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah.
Good morning, Brandon. Keloland Kids, the news that starts your day, begins right now. My name is Jeremiah Dunho. Today's coverage is over the Civil War. We go to Carson on the South Carolina secession. There you go, Carson.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Right now I'm here with Taylor giving us details about the South Carolina secession.
The fierce serious threat of secession came from New England, the South. England, not the South. In 1814, delegates from the New England states gathered at the Hartford Constitution. While Attons were united in opposition to War of 1812, moderates outnumbered extreme delegates who wanted secession. South Carolina, which would become the first state to succeed during the Civil War, also had earlier threatened secession in 1828 over tariffs that were harming the state's economy. President Andrew Jackson threatened to send federal troops to put down the secessionists.
Thanks, Taylor. Now back to the studio where Jeremiah is.
Thanks, Carson. Up next comes a report at Fort Sumter, but first, a quick look at the weather.
I'm Mercedes Montoya, and here's the weather. There will most likely be rain. There may even be a thunderstorm. The rain will get the gunpowder and paper cartridges wet, making them hard to fire accurately. To all the Army men who want a weather report, be careful in the rain. More than 2,000 men are likely to fall in the storm. It may change, though. Now I'm off to get my umbrella. It's all yours, Jeremiah.
We are interviewing an eyewitness of Fort Sumter.
The Battle of Fort Sumter began April 12th through the 14th, 1861. It took place in South Carolina. The reason the war started was because of slavery. The North wanted to end slavery, but the South wanted slavery, so the farmers could get help in the field.
I'm interviewing an eyewitness of the Battle of the Bull Run.
Thank you, Carson. The Battle of Bull Run was fought between the North and the South. The battle got its name from the lake they fought on, which was called the Bull Run. The battle was fought on the morning of July 21st, 1861. The Battle of Bull Run was caused by the Confederates who invaded the Union while they marched towards Richmond. But the Union was able to hold the attack, causing the Confederates to retreat, which took 5 hours to accomplish.
Thank you, Carter. Switching to Jeremiah, who was at the military draft.
Thanks, Carson. Now, let's go to the story on the military draft. The military draft of the Civil War was hard to avoid. For one, you have to be 18 to 35 in the South at first, but it was reduced to 17 to 50. In 1862, the South started to enroll people. Men could get out of it in two ways: by paying $300 or by hiring some other man to take your place. In conclusion, the draft of the Civil War was a tough draft because it was mandatory and everybody didn't want to have to go into the war right then to lose their lives. And I found that some more important points are, the first important point is the South started it, not the North, in 1862. Second important point was the pool of enrollers were from 18 to 35, but then it was taken down to 17 to 50 near the end of the war. And the important point, well, actually in the heat of the war, because they needed more people. And the third important point, back to this, 2 ways to get out of the drafting is paying $300, which is a lot, and or hiring some other man to do it.
Out of the ballpark, sports report by Isaac Timmerman. Here's our sports.
Thanks, Carson. Good morning. My name is Isaac Timmerman, and I am here with your Civil War sports report. During the Civil War, soldiers would play games in between marches. They would play horseshoes and cards.
Also, they would read newspapers, magazines, and the Bible. Sometimes they would sing. If they were close enough to enemy line, they would trade newspapers. Around the USA, there was sports going on. These sports are boxing and horse racing. Sports reporters would bet on sports. Betting was very big back then. People would usually play sports to take their minds off the Civil War. Now here's Carson at Lincoln's
I'm here
inauguration.
with Keloland kids at Lincoln's inauguration. Lincoln was inaugurated on March 4th, 1861. The crowd was so hostile they made really bad remarks about Lincoln. So Lincoln's guards had orders to shoot anyone crowding toward the carriage. Abe's carriage was closely surrounded by marshals and cavalry. There was 25,000 people there. Oh my! Abe just bent over and kissed the book. Some people think he's going to get shot, but he probably won't. The South wants him killed because he wants to abolish slavery. Although Abe was a Republican, the opposer, Douglas, was a Democrat. The people from the Midwest and North thought that he would be a great president. Thank you for your time. That was Lincoln's inauguration.
That's all from Keloland Kids, and that's how it was. Have a nice day.
Freedom, and although he may be poor,
There will not be a lot of jokes today because ha 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 700,000 people died.
Mr. Green, actually only 680,000 people died.
Yeah, it depends on how you count, you sniveling little ghoul. But recent estimates are between 680,000 and 800,000 total casualties, deadlier for Americans than the American Revolution, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam.
Hello, I'm Kate
combined.
Jacobson. Good afternoon. Brandon, Keloland Kids, the news that brightens your afternoon. First up is Olivia with the Monitor versus Merrimack.
Yes, and I'm here with Olivia reporting on Monitor versus Merrimack. What is this Monitor versus Merrimack all about, Olivia?
The Monitor versus Merrimack is about two American warships. The Monitor versus Merrimack was called the Battle of Hampton Roads. The Monitor is from the north and the Merrimack is from the south. On March 8, 1862, two ships were fighting. One was called the Merrimack and the other was called the Monitor. They fought with very large cannons. The ships were known as the ironclads because they were covered in iron. Back then, the ships were armor-plated ships, so when they were done fighting, both ships were barely damaged.
That was interesting, Olivia. Now back to Kate.
Thanks, Olivia. Now it's Jaden with the Battle of Shiloh.
Here live with Jaden, a survivor of the Battle of Shiloh. Tell me about it, Jaden.
Hello, I'm here. My name is Jaden. I am here at the Battle of Shiloh. I'm going to talk about the Battle of Shiloh. The date was April 6, 1862. An army commanded by Ulysses S. Grant. And it was the first time being under siege by the enemies for most soldiers. The next day, there were many dead soldiers covering the battlefield. The North ended up winning, but both sides took a huge toll of deaths. The Battle of Shiloh showed the war would be long and bloody.
Well, it was long indeed. Back to Kate in the studio.
Huh, that sounds very fun. Now let's go over
The
to
battlefield
Peyton.
of Antietam with Peyton. Tell me some things about it, Peyton.
Good afternoon. I'm Peyton Hacker, and I'm going to tell you about the Battle of Antietam. When the fighting ended, nearly 6,000 Confederate and Union soldiers were dead, and 17,000 were seriously injured in the war. The Battle of Antietam was also known as the deadliest day in the history of the world. Sorry, Beth. I wish I had more of a personal life.
Okay, that was great. Back to the studio with Kate.
Thanks, Bethany. Now I'm going to do a report on the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. This amendment was proposed on January 31st, 1865, and it was ratified on December 6th, 1865. Northern Democrats and Republicans were against slavery's expansion. When you look at the Constitution, it states, neither slavery nor involuntarily servitude except as a punishment for crime and whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place, subject to their jurisdiction. In conclusion, there were some facts about the 13th Amendment. And now I've got some points for the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. Second important point. Southern Democrats and Republicans were against slavery's expansion. My third point is the House passed the amendment, then Georgia passed it, so it became an amendment. Let's go over to Jonathan, the weatherman. Is it soggy or foggy? We'll find out.
And this is the weather for the south. The Confederate Army had a hard winter. Disease spread rapidly, killing more soldiers than battles. Since the heavy rains, winds, floods, and muddy roads, it made it hard for supply wagons to get through. Some of the roads froze, supply wagons were stuck, and the soldiers' shoes were floating by the cold. In the summer of 1862, it was so hot that the water dried up, so water was scarce. And that was the weather for the South. And now here is Kate at Lincoln's inauguration.
Wow, I guess the weather was bad. Now let's give it up for Bethany with the biography on Stonewall Jackson.
Hi, I'm Beth, and I'm Stonewall Jackson's sister, and today I'm going to tell you about my brother. Stonewall Jackson was born in Clarksburg, Virginia. His real name is Thomas Jackson, but he gets the name Stonewall from standing like a stone wall in the First Battle of Bull Run. He was a Confederate general and one of the most recognized officers who fought under Robert E. Lee. Jackson was assigned to the war zone in Mexico. After the Mexican War, Jackson served at many different forts. Thomas retired from the military and became a teacher in 1850 and taught until 1861. In 1863, Thomas went back to war and his own men shot him, thinking he was an intruder. Pneumonia soon led to his death 8 days later. 1855 is when he was finally elected for the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. So let's go over some important points. He fought for our country. Second, he taught children in our country. And the third, he's in the Hall of Fame for Great Americans in 1855.
That's all for today, and that's how it was on Keloland Kids.
So spoiler alert, the Union won the war, which in a sense is unsurprising because they had massive advantages. For starters, they had many more people, approximately 22 million as compared to 9 million in the South, of whom 3.5 million were slaves and therefore unlikely to be sympathetic to the Southern cause. Also, the North manufactured more than 90% of all goods in America. Its factories turned out 17 times more textiles than the South, 30 times more shoes and boots, 13 times more iron, and 32 times more firearms. Plus, at the outbreak of the war, the North had 20,000 miles of railroad compared with the South's 10,000. This made it easier for the Union to move its army, which over the course of the war enlisted more than 2 million men compared with 900,000 for the Confederacy. Even Northern agriculture was more productive, taking greater advantage of mechanization than Southern farmers did. Really, the only advantage the South had was better military leaders, like most of the tactically famous generals of the Civil War, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, etc., were Southerners and also...
Keloland Kids News, the news that ends your day, starts now. First up, we have Evan out in the field with important news.
We're here with Eli with the Emancipation Proclamation.
Thank you, Evan. Hello. Is it not obvious? My name is Eli Wills. I am here on the ground of the place where our 16th President, Abraham Lincoln, was elected President of the United States on 1863. Lincoln just read a very important document in our United States history. 5 days after the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln read a paper called the Emancipation Proclamation. This document says that all enslaved people should be freed. This was made from Abraham Lincoln on 1863. I bet all people working at the plantations with slaves were really mad. Some maybe even yelled, "No!" like King George III after he heard he lost the Revolutionary War. Not the slaves, though. Only the slaves of the Confederate States were free.
Now back to Grace at the studio.
Thank you, Evan. Next we have Braylon with the weather in the north.
Grace, good evening. My name is Braylon Coburnus. I am your evening weather reporter. Here's your weather report. You better keep drinking water because you're going to be very thirsty. It was very hot during parts of the war. There were droughts and it was very hard for them to get supplies. Just look at these soldiers. Wow, they look hot. Also, it made it very hard for them to fight because of the heat. The weather affected the war because they determined how they were going to fight by what the weather was going to be like. When it was supposed to rain, it was harder to fight because all the supplies got wet. A lot of people complained because their tents got wet, then they were exhausted while fighting. Many soldiers would get sick from the weather. That is how the weather affected the war. Three most important parts about the weather. The weather was influential on the overall strategy on the battlefield. Rain made it very difficult to fight in battle because of these supplies getting wet, and soldiers were getting sick from the drastic change in weather.
Well, that is one good weather report. Up next is Evan with an important news flash at Gettysburg.
We are here today with Summer of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Good evening. My name is Summer, and I am here in the quiet battlefield, live at the Battle of Gettysburg. Take a look at the brave warriors that risked their life to save our country. This battle was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Don't we take a moment of silence to look at who these warriors were. So as you can see, the warriors are dead and very, very brave to stand up for our country. Well, it all started on July 1st. Robert E. Lee led his army to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Union and the Confederate collided at Gettysburg. The bloody war had just started. This war was the turning point of the war.
The United States, the first 3 days of July 1863 saw the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. This was General Lee's furthest major offensive in the North, and had he won the battle, it is likely that panic would have set in places like Philadelphia and maybe even New York. Actually, panic did overcome New York in draft riots that killed more than 100 people and only ended after troops from Gettysburg were called in. I'm not going to go into detail about either of these battles, but they shifted the tide of the war in favor of the North, although not enough to bring the war to a quick end. Confederate forces would never again threaten a northern city.
Wow, that is sad. Well, now we have live footage of Abe Lincoln.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in the liberty and dedicated into the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that the nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that have nation who might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this.
But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot considerate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have considerated it for above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what we did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus for so nobly advanced.
It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people by the people for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Thank you. Next we go to Evan with another report.
We are here today with Izzy at the Sherman's March to the Sea.
Thank you, Evan. As Sherman and his troops marched, they destroyed towns. They stole livestock and ate their food, then burned the houses if they tried to fight back. He destroyed and captured Atlanta, Georgia, so the railroads aren't able to ship supplies to them. Sherman also left the livestock dead for vultures to eat. When Sherman destroyed the South, people realized that if the South was finished, the war is over. After that, the war was considered near the end. Now, because of this, people regained confidence in Lincoln and re-elected him in 1864. Now back to you, Evan.
Thanks, Izzy. That was quite an exciting story. Now back to Grace at the studio.
Now I have some awesome news.
Thank you, Grace. Good evening. My name is Isaac Sosno, and I'm here with you with the Civil War Sports Report. I'm going to talk about some famous sports around the USA. There was basketball, horse racing, and boxing. Baseball, I mean. Baseball was a very famous sport back then. It even had baseball fields, bats, gloves, and a ball. The next sport I'm going to talk about is horse racing. Nearly most people in 1665, the first horse racetrack was made on Long Island in North America. The last sport is boxing. Boxing was a sport to test their skills and fight, skills and strength. Most activities for soldiers, most soldiers got newspapers and read them. They read the newspapers to see what the South said to them. Soldiers would go to settle store that they would go get friends, play cards, and sit down and talk. And back to Grace.
Thank you. General Lee can no longer defend Petersburg, so the two generals have met at the merchant Wilmer McLean's house. They have decided on these surrender terms. First, they will no longer fight the government. Also, the Union gave the Confederates food and let them keep their horses and go home. In conclusion, the war is finally over. So the important points are Lee can no longer defend Petersburg. The terms are that the Confederate gets to keep their horses and gets food from the Union. And the third important point is that they met at Wilmer McLean's house. I have terrible news. Lincoln has been shot. Here's Evan.
My name is Evan. I am here at Ford Theater where President Lincoln was just shot by John Wilkes Booth. And the president is in the building across the street. I was told that Booth escaped even though he broke his leg. Lincoln was shot through the head by the man and is not going to live till the next morning. We have been told they found and killed Booth just minutes ago. And his last words were, "Tell my mother I died for my country." Well, folks, and you heard the story that our president was just killed, and though he died, justice was brought among Booth.
Thank you, and that's the way we end your day.
That's all, folks! We're watching Keloland Kids.
Round the flag, boys will rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll rally from the hillside till gathers from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the star. While we rally round the flag, boys, we rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Oh, we're springing to the call.